I never thought shoveling a little snow for my neighbors would ignite a war, but that's exactly what happened. It was a war that involved lawyers, liens, and a level of petty tyranny that would make a history book dictator blush. It ended with me accidentally owning the very ground my enemy stood on, which I have to admit was a profoundly satisfying turn of events. My name is Jack, and for the last 15 years, I've lived in a quiet little subdivision called Whispering Pines. It's the kind of place with mature oak trees, wide lawns, and a general sense of peaceful anonymity. I run my own business, a landscaping and property maintenance company that keeps me busy in the summer with mowing and planting, and just as busy in the winter with snow and ice management for commercial clients. I'm a practical guy. I like straightforward problems with clear solutions, which is probably why I enjoy my job. A lawn is overgrown, you mow it. A driveway is full of snow, you clear it. Simple. Whispering Pines had always been just as simple. We had a homeowners association, but for most of my time here, it was a benign entity. It was run by old Mr. Henderson, a retiree who had lived in the neighborhood since it was first built. His version of the HOA existed for one reason: to collect $100 from each of the 50-odd households once a year to pay a local kid to mow the small green space at the entrance. That was it. No rules about the color of your front door, no regulations on garden gnomes, no architectural review committee to approve your choice of mailbox. We were just a collection of people living our lives, borrowing cups of sugar and waving as we passed each other on the street. That all changed about 2 years ago with the arrival of Carol. She and her husband bought the corner house on the main loop, a nice 2-story colonial that had belonged to a family who moved for a job relocation. From the moment she arrived, Carol seemed to operate on a different frequency from the rest of us. She carried herself with an air of unearned authority, as if she had been appointed to a position of great importance that the rest of us were simply unaware of. She saw problems where none existed and solutions that nobody asked for. Mr. Henderson, then in his late 80s, was ready to finally give up his informal role as HOA president. At the annual meeting, which was usually just a 5-minute affair on his front porch, Carol volunteered to take over. Nobody else wanted the job. We all just wanted to pay our $100 and go back to our Sunday afternoons. We shrugged, thanked Mr. Henderson for his service, and unanimously voted Carol in. It was a decision that would come back to haunt every single one of us. The changes started small, almost imperceptibly. A month after she took over, we all received a glossy, professionally printed newsletter. It was the first Whispering Pines newsletter in history. It announced the formation of several new committees: an architectural review committee, a landscaping and beautification committee, and a covenants enforcement committee. Carol, of course, was the chairperson of all of them. The newsletter was written in a tone that was both cheerful and vaguely threatening. Then came the new rules. The first one was about trash receptacles. All trash and recycling bins had to be stored out of public view, either in a garage or behind a pre-approved fence. A violation would result in a $25 fine. People grumbled. Most of us just kept our bins on the side of the house, tucked away but not hidden. It was a minor inconvenience, but most people complied. It wasn't worth the fight. Next was a mandate on mailboxes. The old charmingly mismatched collection of mailboxes was deemed aesthetically inconsistent with the community's desired standard. We were all required, at our own expense, to purchase a specific model of black, powder-coated metal mailbox from a specific supplier. This was more annoying. The approved mailbox cost nearly $200. Again, there was grumbling, but one by one, the old mailboxes were replaced by the uniform black ones. Carol would drive slowly past our houses in her mid-sized luxury sedan, a small notepad on her passenger seat, undoubtedly checking off the compliant homeowners. Her power grew with each new unopposed regulation. The annual fee jumped from $100 to $500 to cover increased administrative costs, insurance, and professional landscaping services. The local kid who used to mow the entrance was fired. In his place, a company called Prestige Landscape Solutions was hired. Their work was, to my professional eye, mediocre and overpriced. Their truck was often parked outside Carol's house, and the driver looked suspiciously like her cousin, but at the time, it was just a fleeting thought. The community's quiet, neighborly cooperation began to fray at the edges. A subtle paranoia set in. People started getting violation notices for things that were once considered normal life. A basketball hoop left at the end of a driveway overnight. A small political sign in a yard a week after the election. A child's brightly colored playset that was visible from the street. Fines were issued, and letters filled with legalistic jargon were sent. Carol was no longer just an annoying neighbor. She was a petty tyrant, ruling her tiny fiefdom with an iron fist and a 3-ring binder full of rules she seemed to be inventing as she went along. I mostly stayed out of it. My property was always well maintained by default. It was a walking advertisement for my business, after all. I kept my bins in the garage. I bought the stupidly expensive mailbox, and I didn't have any yard decorations for her to complain about. I just wanted to be left alone to do my work, pay my mortgage, and enjoy my peace and quiet. I figured if I didn't give her a reason to notice me, she wouldn't. I was wrong. The reason I had failed to account for was an act of God, or as the Weather Channel called it, the snowpocalypse. It started on a Tuesday in late January. The forecast had been calling for a major winter storm, but nobody was prepared for what we got. It snowed for 36 hours straight. When it finally stopped, we were buried under nearly 3 feet of heavy, wet snow. The wind had sculpted it into drifts that were 5 or 6 feet high in places. The entire region was paralyzed. The governor declared a state of emergency. My house was warm and my pantry was full. I had my commercial-grade plow mounted on my heavy-duty pickup truck and a powerful skid steer with a snowblower attachment sitting in my oversized garage. For me, this was business as usual, just on a much larger scale. My commercial contracts for places like hospitals and distribution centers would keep me busy for days. But before I headed out to start on those, I looked out my kitchen window. The neighborhood was silent and still, a landscape of pure white. Nothing was moving. No cars, no people. Whispering Pines was completely snowed in. I started with my own driveway, easily pushing back the mountain of snow. As I was finishing up, I looked across the street at Mrs. Gable's house. She was in her late 80s, a widow who had lived in that house for 50 years. She was frail and relied on a visiting nurse and Meals on Wheels deliveries. Her small driveway and the walkway to her front door were completely impassable. There was no way anyone was getting in or out. It wasn't even a choice. I drove my truck across the street and in 10 minutes had her driveway cleared. I then got out my snowblower and cleared a wide path to her door. She appeared at the window, a tiny figure with white hair, and gave me a grateful wave. I waved back and was about to head off to my first commercial job when my next-door neighbor, Tom, came trudging through the deep snow. "Jack, man, you're a lifesaver," he said, his breath fogging in the cold air. "I've been out here for an hour with a shovel and I've barely made a dent. My wife's a doctor. She's supposed to be at the hospital. Any chance you could give me a hand?" "Of course," I said. It took me another 15 minutes to clear his driveway. As I finished, another neighbor from down the street appeared. Then another. The story was the same everywhere. People were trapped. They needed to get to work, they had medical appointments, or they were just plain panicked by the sheer volume of snow. The HOA's contracted service, Prestige Landscape Solutions, was nowhere to be seen. The single road that looped through our subdivision was untouched. I made a decision. My commercial clients could wait an hour or two. My neighbors needed help now. I spent the next 3 hours methodically working my way down the street. I cleared driveway after driveway. I used my skid steer to pile the snow neatly on the large, unused common area green space near the entrance of the subdivision. It was the only logical place to put it, a huge empty field where it wouldn't block any roads or hydrants. I wasn't charging anyone a dime. It was just the neighborly thing to do. People were coming out with thermoses of coffee and offering me thanks. It felt good. It felt like the old Whispering Pines. That feeling came to an abrupt end when a dark-colored sedan pulled up and stopped, blocking my truck. Carol got out. She was wearing a pristine, expensive-looking winter coat and had a look of thunderous rage on her face. She marched towards me, her boots crunching in the snow. "What do you think you are doing?" she demanded, her voice sharp and loud. I was a bit taken aback. I'm helping my neighbors dig out, Carol. What does it look like? It looks like you are operating a commercial enterprise on residential property in direct violation of the covenants, she snapped. She held up her phone, which had a document displayed on the screen. Bylaw Section 7, Subsection B, explicitly prohibits the operation of commercial-grade machinery for non-HOA sanctioned purposes. Your vehicle is a commercial vehicle. That thing, she said, gesturing with disgust at my skid steer, is heavy equipment. I sighed, trying to keep my patience. Carol, look around. People are trapped in their homes. Mrs. Gable needs her nurse to be able to get to her. Tom's wife is a doctor. The HOA's snow guy is a no-show. I'm just helping out. You are not helping out, she mimicked, her voice dripping with scorn. You are violating the rules. Furthermore, you are piling all of this snow on HOA common property. That constitutes illegal dumping. You are creating an unsightly mess and a potential liability. I stared at her, dumbfounded by the sheer absurdity of it. A liability? It's snow. Carol. It's piled on an empty field. Where else is it supposed to go? Back in the sky? Her eyes narrowed. That is not your concern. Your concern is to follow the rules that you agreed to when you purchased your home in this community. This is your only warning. Cease this activity immediately. Remove your equipment from the roadway. If you do not comply, I will have no choice but to issue a formal citation and a fine of $500. I felt a surge of anger, hot against the cold air. I looked past her, at the cleared driveways, at the grateful faces of my neighbors who were watching from their windows. I looked at the still impassable road. Are you serious? I asked, my voice low. You want me to stop? You want people to stay snowed in, waiting for your cousin's joke of a snow service to maybe show up tomorrow? My cousin, she sputtered, a flash of something, guilt, perhaps, in her eyes. Prestige Landscape Solutions is a bonded and insured professional company. They are dealing with a regional emergency. They will get to our community when they can. Until then, everyone must wait. The rules are the rules, especially in an emergency. They are what separate us from chaos. No, Carol, I said, finally losing my temper. Helping your neighbors is what separates us from chaos. Rules like yours are what create it. I turned my back on her, got back into my truck, and drove it to the next uncleared driveway. I heard her shriek my name, followed by a threat. Fine, you'll be hearing from my office. A fine is coming, Jack, a big one. The next morning, true to her word, there was a stiff, cream-colored envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal violation notice from the Whispering Pines Homeowners Association. It cited 2 infractions: operation of commercial equipment for unsanctioned purposes and improper disposal of waste on common property. Each carried a $500 fine for a total of $1,000. There was a grainy, zoomed-in photo of my truck and another of the neatly piled snowbank. The letter stated that failure to pay within 30 days would result in additional late fees and potential legal action. I crumpled the letter in my fist. $1,000. For helping my neighbors during a state of emergency. The sheer, unadulterated gall of it was breathtaking. I had lived here for 15 years, paid my taxes, maintained my property, and been a quiet, responsible member of the community. In one morning, by committing an act of basic human decency, I had become a criminal in the eyes of Queen Carol. A few days passed. The main roads were finally cleared by the town, but our subdivision's loop was still a mess of packed snow and ice. Prestige Landscape Solutions had eventually shown up, made a single, sloppy pass down the middle of the road, and disappeared. It was barely an improvement. Mail delivery was still suspended because the carrier couldn't get to the mailboxes. A delivery truck got stuck trying to bring a package to someone. The whole neighborhood was on edge. I decided on a new strategy: malicious compliance. I had always done a little extra, free of charge. I would often clear the snow from around the cluster of mailboxes or tidy up the entrance green space. No more. I meticulously cleared my own driveway and my own walkway. I used my snowblower to create perfectly vertical, razor-sharp edges to my property line. Beyond that line, the snow and ice remained, a testament to the HOA's incompetence. Carol, of course, was not appeased. Another envelope appeared. This one was for a new violation: Failure to maintain adjoining public walkway. There was, in fact, no public walkway, just the edge of the road, but she had fined me $250 anyway. The fines were piling up. It was becoming clear that this wasn't about rules anymore. This was personal. She was making an example of me. The final straw involved my work trailer. It was a 16-foot enclosed trailer where I kept my mowers and other landscaping equipment. I usually parked it at a commercial lot I rented, but with the snow still making travel difficult, I had brought it home and parked it on the street in front of my house for a couple of days. It was out of the way and not blocking traffic, what little there was. This, in Carol's eyes, was an offense of the highest order. The next letter that arrived was not just a fine. It was a certified letter from an attorney's office. It informed me that I was in violation of a covenant prohibiting the parking of commercial trailers in the neighborhood for more than 24 hours. It stated that my accumulated fines now totaled $1,750 plus late fees. And then came the hammer blow. If the full amount was not paid and the trailer was not removed within 10 days, the HOA would place a lien on my property. A lien. That was a different level of warfare. A lien could mess with my credit, my ability to get loans for my business, and the title to my home. This woman, this petty tyrant who had been in the neighborhood for all of 2 years, was threatening my home and my livelihood over a pile of snow and a legally parked trailer. My frustration curdled into a cold, hard resolve. She had pushed me too far. The time for being reasonable was over. I called a lawyer. His name was Ben, a recommendation from a friend. He was a sharp, no-nonsense guy in his 40s who specialized in real estate and contract law. I sat in his office, a stack of Carol's violation letters on the polished table between us, and laid out the entire story, from the first newsletter to the lien threat. Ben listened patiently, leaning back in his chair and steepling his fingers. When I finished, he nodded slowly. "Well," he said, "you've got yourself a classic case of an overzealous HOA board president. Unfortunately, the law in this state gives HOAs a surprising amount of power. The covenants you sign when you buy a house are a legally binding contract." "So I'm stuck?" I asked, a feeling of dread washing over me. "I have to pay this woman nearly $2,000 because I cleared snow for an old lady." "Not necessarily," Ben said, a slight smile touching his lips. "They have power, but they're not above the law. Their power is also strictly limited by the documents that create it, the articles of incorporation, the bylaws, and the original covenants. They can't just make things up. And they have a fiduciary duty to act in the best interest of the community. A court might find that levying fines against a resident for providing emergency aid during a snowpocalypse is not, in fact, in the best interest of the community." He leaned forward. "This threat of a lien is serious, but it's also our opening. To place a lien, they have to follow a very specific legal process. We can challenge that process. But first, we need to do some digging. We need to go on the offensive." That was exactly what I wanted to hear. Ben's first move was to send a formal, legally intimidating letter to the HOA's lawyer, disputing all fines and demanding a full record of all HOA documents, including meeting minutes, financial statements, and all current contracts, as was my right as a homeowner. Carol had previously ignored my informal requests for these documents, but a letter from a law firm was a different matter. While we waited for that, I started talking to my neighbors. I went to Arthur, the retired accountant who had lived down the street from me for years. Arthur was sharp as a tack and had been on the original informal HOA board with Mr. Henderson. He was my wise elder, my ally. He was just as disgusted with Carol's reign as I was. "She's a menace, Jack," he said, sitting in his cluttered study, which smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. "This isn't a community anymore. It's a police state with lawn regulations. Henderson would be rolling in his grave." Arthur had copies of the original subdivision plans and bylaws from the 1970s. We spent a long evening hunched over his dining room table, comparing the old, simple documents with the new, convoluted rulebook Carol had created. We were looking for any inconsistency, any procedural error she might have made when she amended the rules. A week later, A thick package of documents arrived at Ben's office from the HOA's lawyer. It contained the financials, the meeting minutes, and the contract with Prestige Landscape Solutions. Ben and I, along with Arthur, who volunteered his accounting expertise, spent a weekend poring over them. The meeting minutes were a joke. They were clearly written by Carol herself and simply rubber-stamped by her two cronies on the board. The financials were more interesting. Arthur's eyes lit up as he noticed the exorbitant, vaguely described fees being paid to Prestige. "Look at this," Arthur said, pointing to an invoice. "Winter Event Remediation Services, $8,000. For that one sloppy pass their truck made down our road. That's highway robbery. And here, Common Area Horticultural Enhancement, $10,000 for a few new shrubs at the entrance. Jack, you could have done that for a tenth of the price." It was clear Carol was using the HOA's funds to enrich her cousin. It was corrupt, but we needed more. We needed something undeniable. The key, the one thing that would blow the whole thing wide open, came from a place none of us expected. It was buried deep in the oldest documents Arthur had. The original plat maps and development deeds from when Whispering Pines was first carved out of a large tract of farmland. Ben, with his lawyer's eye for detail, was tracing the property lines and ownership transfers. "That's odd," he murmured, tracing a line on the faded map with his finger. "Look here. The developer, a company called Oakwood Homes, laid out all the lots and the common areas. They deeded the lots to the initial buyers and the common areas to the Whispering Pines HOA." "Right," I said. "So the HOA owns the green space she was mad about me piling snow on." "Correct," Ben said. "But look at the roads. Aspen Drive, Pine Needle Court. They're all drawn here, but there's no record of them ever being formally dedicated to the municipality. That's a crucial step. If a developer doesn't dedicate the roads, the town won't take ownership, and they won't be responsible for maintaining them." Arthur chimed in. "I remember that. Oakwood Homes went bankrupt right after they finished the last house. It was a big mess. The town council refused to accept the roads because some of the storm drains weren't up to code." A thrill went through me. "So who owns the roads?" I asked. Ben was already typing furiously on his laptop, cross-referencing county property records. "Okay, so when Oakwood Homes went belly up, their remaining assets were liquidated. The roads, being unsold parcels of land, would have been part of that. They're what's known as remnant parcels, odd bits and pieces that are often sold in bulk for pennies on the dollar to investors who specialize in untangling messy titles." He paused, his eyes widening as he read from the screen. "Here it is. The titles for all the roadbeds in the Whispering Pines subdivision were sold in a bankruptcy auction in 1988 to a single buyer, a holding company called Apex Land Holdings, LLC. My blood ran cold. Apex Land Holdings. It couldn't be. "What is it, Jack?" Ben asked, noticing the look on my face. I felt a slow, incredulous smile spread across my face. Years ago, as a side investment for my business, I had gotten into the obscure world of buying remnant parcels and tax-delinquent properties. It was a little hobby, a way to potentially acquire land cheaply. I had set up a simple, anonymous LLC to handle these purchases. It was a shell company that did nothing but hold the titles to a handful of weird, forgotten slivers of land across the state. I looked at Ben, then at Arthur, and I started to laugh. It was a deep, booming laugh of pure, unadulterated shock and triumph. "Ben," I said, my voice shaking with amusement, "pull up the incorporation papers for Apex Land Holdings." He typed for a moment, then his jaw dropped. He turned the laptop screen towards me. There, listed as the sole registered agent and owner, was my name. I owned the streets. I owned every square inch of asphalt in Whispering Pines. The road Carol had ordered me off of. The street she was fining me for parking my trailer on. She had been threatening me, fining me, and trying to put a lien on my house for using my own private property. The game had just been flipped on its head. I wasn't the defendant anymore. I was the landlord. The shift in strategy was immediate and total. We were no longer on the defensive, trying to fend off fines. We were on the attack. Ben's demeanor changed from that of a cautious defender to a gleeful predator. He saw the beautiful, brutal simplicity of the situation. Carol's entire authority was built on a foundation of rules governing a community, but a huge part of that community, the very infrastructure that connected it, wasn't hers to govern. "This is beautiful, Jack. Just beautiful," Ben said, pacing his office. "She has zero jurisdiction over the roadways. None. Every fine she's issued related to activity on the street, parking, operating your truck, is completely fraudulent. She's not just wrong, she's potentially liable for harassment and attempting to collect a fraudulent debt." Our plan came together quickly. Carol, in her infinite arrogance, had already done the work for us. She had called a special emergency HOA meeting. The official purpose, according to the notice she'd sent out, was to discuss ongoing covenant violations by a resident and to authorize a vote for a special assessment to cover legal expenditures required to ensure compliance. She was going to publicly shame me and then make my neighbors pay for her legal battle against me. It was the perfect stage for our counteroffensive. In the days leading up to the meeting, I felt a strange sense of calm. The anger and frustration had been replaced by a focused, almost giddy anticipation. I had the truth in my back pocket, a truth so absolute and so devastating that it was almost comical. While I waited, I decided to give Carol a little more rope to hang herself with. I moved my trailer from the front of my house and parked it directly in front of hers. I didn't block her driveway, of course. I just parked it legally on the street. My street. I saw her face appear in her front window, contorted with rage. Her phone came out, and she started taking pictures. Within an hour, another email landed in my inbox, this one directly from Carol, CCing the HOA's lawyer. It was a furious, rambling tirade about my blatant and malicious disregard for the community, and informing me that she was adding an additional $1,000 fine for this aggressive escalation. I saved the email. It was another nail for her coffin. The night of the meeting arrived. The community center, a small building near the entrance that was rarely used for anything other than children's birthday parties, was packed. I had never seen so many of my neighbors in one place. Word had gotten out that the HOA was trying to place a lien on my house, and the trailer I had parked in front of Carol's place had become the talk of the neighborhood. The room was buzzing with a tense energy. People were fed up. Carol and her two bored cronies, a sour-faced woman named Marge and a perpetually confused-looking man named Gary, sat at a folding table at the front of the room. Carol was in her element. She banged a small gavel on the table to call the meeting to order. She launched into a long, self-righteous monologue. She spoke of the importance of maintaining our property values and protecting the aesthetic integrity of our beautiful community. She painted a picture of herself as a tireless guardian of order, battling against forces of chaos and decay. And I, apparently, was the primary agent of that chaos. "We have a resident," she began, not using my name at first, "who believes the rules do not apply to him. He operates heavy industrial equipment on our quiet residential streets, creating noise and a safety hazard." She clicked a remote, and a picture of my plow truck appeared on a projector screen. "He uses our common areas as his personal dumping ground," she continued, showing a picture of the now shrinking snow pile. "And when confronted, he responds with defiance and aggression." The next slide was a photo of my trailer, parked in front of her house. "This flagrant disregard for our bylaws cannot be tolerated," she declared, her voice rising. "I have issued fines, as is my duty. These fines have been ignored. Therefore, the board has been forced to retain legal counsel to compel compliance, up to and including the placement of a lien on the offender's property." A murmur went through the crowd. These legal actions cost money, money that should be going towards beautifying our community. That is why I am asking for a vote tonight to approve a special assessment of $100 per household to fund the Covenant Compliance Legal Fund. She was asking them to pay her to sue me. It was breathtaking. She then opened the floor for discussion, clearly expecting a few grumbles but ultimate agreement from a cowed audience. This was our cue. Ben and I, who had been sitting quietly in the back, stood up. I walked calmly to the front of the room. A hush fell over the crowd. "Carol," I said, my voice steady, "before we vote on taking $100 from each of our neighbors to pay for your legal fight against me, I have a few questions for you, just to clarify the situation." She looked annoyed but waved a hand dismissively. "Very well, Jack, you may speak." "Thank you," I said. "You've cited me for operating my truck on the street and for parking my trailer on the street. Is that correct?" "That is correct," she said smugly. "Clear violations of Sections 7 and 12. "And under what authority does the HOA regulate the use of the streets in Whispering Pines?" I asked. She scoffed. "Under the authority of the governing documents, of course. The HOA is responsible for maintaining the community and enforcing the rules within it." "I understand that," I said, "but my question is more specific. For the HOA to regulate a piece of property, it must either own that property or have a specific, legally recorded easement granting it regulatory power. So let me ask again, who owns the streets?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "The HOA. The HOA owns the common property, which includes the streets," she said, her voice a little less certain. "Are you sure about that, Carol?" I pressed. "Because I've looked at the property records, all of them, and it seems you're mistaken." At that moment, Ben stepped forward, holding a thick file folder. "Madam President," he said, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who knew he held a royal flush. "My name is Ben Carter. I am Mr. Smith's legal counsel, and I'm afraid my client is correct. You do not own the roads." He walked to the table and laid a certified plat map on it. "This is the final plat map for the Whispering Pines subdivision. As you can see, the developer, Oakwood Homes, never dedicated the road parcels to the municipality. Due to the developer's bankruptcy, ownership was never transferred to the HOA either. For the last 30-plus years, the streets you've been driving on have been privately owned." The room was dead silent. You could hear the hum of the overhead lights. Carol stared at the map as if it were a snake. That's not possible," she stammered. "This is a trick." "It is not a trick, Madam President," Ben said smoothly. "It is a matter of public record. The road parcels were sold in a bankruptcy auction in 1988 to a private holding company. That company has held the title and paid the property taxes on them ever since." Carol's face was a mask of confusion and fury. "What company? Who are they? We'll sue them." This was the moment. I stepped forward again. All eyes in the room were on me. "There's no need for that, Carol," I said. "The name of the company is Apex Land Holdings, LLC. I paused for effect. "And I own it. I own the streets, every last one of them." The silence was shattered. The room erupted. People were yelling, laughing, shouting questions. Carol's face went from red to a ghostly white. She looked at me, then at Ben, then back at me. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Her entire world, her entire basis of power, had just evaporated. You can't," she finally choked out. "It's a lie. It's a conspiracy." But the damage was done. Arthur, my ally, stood up from his seat in the front row. "I think," he said in his calm, authoritative voice, "that this demonstrates that the current board president is fundamentally incompetent to manage the affairs of this community. She has exposed this HOA to massive legal liability by attempting to enforce rules on property she does not control, and by attempting to collect fraudulent fines." "And that's not all," Ben added, pulling another folder from his briefcase. "In reviewing the financials you were forced to provide, we also found evidence of significant financial misconduct. Specifically, the exorbitant contracts awarded without a competitive bidding process to Prestige Landscape Solutions." He looked directly at Carol. "A company, we have discovered, that is owned and operated by your husband's cousin, Alan Peterson. You have been using this community's money to enrich your own family." That was the kill shot. The accusation of corruption, on top of the spectacular implosion of her authority, was too much. The room descended into chaos. Marge and Gary, her bored cronies, looked at her with horror, slowly sliding their chairs away from her. Someone in the back of the room was on the phone, and I heard the words fraud and police. Carol stood up, her face a mess of tears and rage. "You are all against me," she screamed. "I did this for you, to make this place better." She grabbed her purse and her gavel and stormed out of the community center, pushing past the stunned homeowners. Just as she burst through the door, two uniformed police officers were walking in. Someone had indeed called them. They looked at the chaotic scene, then at the weeping, screaming woman who had just run past them. The climax wasn't just her public humiliation, it was the immediate and official intervention her own actions had wrought. Her reign of terror was over. The aftermath of that meeting was swift and decisive. The police took statements from Ben, Arthur, and several other residents right there in the community center. The evidence of financial malfeasance, with the invoices from Prestige Landscape Solutions and Arthur's expert analysis, was clear and compelling. The district attorney's office launched a formal investigation into the Whispering Pines HOA's finances the very next day. Carol was officially charged with multiple counts of embezzlement and wire fraud. Her attempts to use the HOA as her personal piggy bank were laid bare for the world to see. The legal process was slow, as it always is, but it was thorough. Her lawyer tried to argue that it was all a simple misunderstanding, a matter of poor bookkeeping. But the paper trail was undeniable. She had funneled tens of thousands of dollars of our community's funds to her cousin for work that was either laughably overpriced or never even performed. She was convicted on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 5 years of probation, a hefty fine, and most importantly, full financial restitution to the homeowners of Whispering Pines. She was forced to sell her house, the colonial she had lorded over us from, to pay back the money she had stolen. My own vindication was just as complete. The HOA's lawyer, realizing his client was a sinking ship, immediately sent a letter to Ben formally withdrawing all fines, rescinding the threat of a lien, and offering a groveling apology for the misunderstanding. The illegal lien was never filed. The violation notices became nothing more than souvenirs of a bizarre war I had accidentally won. With Carol gone, and her two cronies having resigned from the board in disgrace, the HOA effectively ceased to exist. We held another community meeting a few weeks later, this one with a completely different tone. It was collaborative, not combative. We voted unanimously to dissolve the old, corrupted HOA. In its place, we formed a simple neighborhood committee. Arthur was elected chairman by a landslide. The $500 annual fee was abolished. We went back to the old system, a voluntary contribution of $100 a year to cover the mowing of the entrance. We even hired the local high school kid back. The thick, convoluted book of rules that Carol had so lovingly crafted was symbolically and literally shredded. We kept only a few basic common-sense covenants from the original 1970s documents. The neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The cloud of paranoia lifted. People started leaving their basketball hoops out again. A vibrant assortment of garden gnomes and plastic flamingos began to reappear on lawns. A cheerful, silent protest against the former regime. As for the roads, I became the most popular landlord in history. At that same meeting, I made a formal declaration. I announced that I was granting a permanent, irrevocable easement to every current and future resident of Whispering Pines for full and free use of the roads for all normal residential purposes. The only thing I reserved was the right to control commercial access and to close the roads for maintenance. The crowd actually cheered. I then put up a few small, tasteful signs at the entrance that read, "Whispering Pines, private roads, no soliciting." It had the wonderful side effect of stopping the endless stream of door-to-door salespeople. I also solved the snow removal problem once and for all. I drew up a simple, at-cost contract between my company and the new neighborhood committee. When it snowed, I would clear all the driveways, the loop road, and the mailboxes. The cost was a fraction of what Carol had been paying her cousin, and the job was done right. It was simple, efficient, and fair. A couple of years have passed since the great HOA war. Whispering Pines is more peaceful and friendlier than it has ever been. Word got around the real estate community that we were a neighborhood with all the benefits of a planned community. Well-maintained homes, a nice entrance, but without a tyrannical HOA. Our property values, which Carol had been so obsessed with, actually went up significantly. People wanted to live here. I did see Carol one more time. It was about a year after she sold her house. I was in the grocery store in the next town over, picking up some things on my way home from a job. I turned a corner into the dairy aisle, and there she was. She looked smaller, diminished. Her expensive coat was gone, replaced by a drab, worn-out jacket. Her hair wasn't perfectly coiffed. She looked tired and defeated. Our eyes met for a brief second. I saw a flash of shame and humiliation in hers. She quickly looked down at the floor, grabbed a carton of milk, and scurried away without a word. I didn't feel triumph or anger. I just felt a quiet sense of pity. She had built a prison of rules for everyone else, but in the end, she was the only one who ended up truly trapped. Looking back on it all now, the whole bizarre episode feels like a fever dream. It started with a simple act of kindness and spiraled into a legal battle that unearthed a decades-old secret buried in a property deed. It taught me that bullies, no matter how much authority they claim, often have a power base built on sand. They rely on the apathy and fear of others. The moment you stop being afraid and start asking questions, their whole world can crumble. Carol's obsession with control, with enforcing every petty rule, was her undoing. In her relentless pursuit of me for a minor, imagined infraction, she forced me to dig until I found the one thing that could destroy her. She was the architect of her own downfall. The other day, we had another snowstorm. Not a snowpocalypse, just a regular 6-inch New England dusting. I fired up my plow truck before dawn, the engine rumbling in the quiet morning air. As I made my first pass down Aspen Drive, my road, I saw a light flick on in Mrs. Gable's window. She stood there, just as she had on that first day, and gave me a little wave. A few minutes later, Arthur came walking down his cleared driveway, a big thermos in his hand. He handed it up to me through the truck window. "Coffee's hot, Jack," he said with a grin. "Don't work too hard." I took a sip. It was perfect. I was just a guy with a plow, doing a job for my neighbors. The peace was restored, and this time I knew it was here to stay.